Um, so my name is Alan Avaziv, um, and I'll be talking about the IRI that I had administered to the student that I had been working with, John Maguano, for the past semester. The student I had worked with, he was part of a 12 to 1-to-1 classroom that I had encountered in my second practicum, SEEDN 695. He was 8 years old. His name was John Maguana, born and raised in the United States, living with his father and mother. He goes to Q811, and he is in the second grade. John's native language was Spanish, and he's fluent in Spanish. On top of that, at home, his mother only speaks to him in Spanish. John's IEP, in John's IEP, he was diagnosed. I've seen that he was diagnosed with intellectual disabilities, and I've observed that I've stayed in that classroom for a duration of 6 weeks, and I've observed John. I've worked with him, noticing that he excels in mathematics. He translates many words during a lesson into Spanish, and he obviously does struggle a little bit with reading, and he loves to play games, iPad, during the break time. For the administration of this IRI, I asked my cooperating teacher, which was his teacher, Ms. Tina Marie, for permission to work with him on the administration of the IRI. The nature of John's difficulty with reading comes primarily from his struggle with reading comprehension, phonemic awareness, and his fluency in reading. I've noticed that perhaps the fact that he does speak a second language very fluently, and that English is not his first language, that he possibly may have these problems arising in his reading. So as I've said, I've received permission from my cooperating teacher, Ms. Tina, to work with him on the administration of the IRI, and then I have written down the results here, which I've discussed in my paper. Concluding from the results, I was able to determine that John could read on a primer level with instructional help, but this would only apply to his oral reading passage, the oral reading passage that he had done, and the listening capacity test. As I've again mentioned in the paper, I was very confused as to why on the silent reading passage he had done very, very poorly. I've actually shared the results with the cooperating teacher, and she, you can say, approved of it. And because of the fact that most of the things that she was working on with him through their reading interventions in the classroom are working on these areas that I have also been able to observe. As I have written here, he has again John struggles with word recognition abilities, reading comprehension skills, particularly with the questions that I had asked him. It was determining the setting of the story, inferences, and questions that revolved around the plot of the story. In the paper as well, I go through a lot of reading interventions that I had witnessed the cooperating teachers that I had been a part of doing within their own classrooms, which I've discussed at length in the paper. And so the intervention that I had planned or I had designed here is based a lot on things that I saw and the research that I cited throughout the paper. I write here, in the conclusion of my paper, I summarize the entire intervention and how I would administer it. Because I have understood that John does struggle with word recognition abilities, the fact that English is not his first language, and that because it is not his first language, he does struggle with these concepts in reading comprehension, I have designed an intervention that would essentially tackle or address all these issues. So what I would do with John specifically would be that I would provide him with a specific text to read, but before I would actually have him read it, I would model reading it out loud myself to him twice, and then have him read it aloud to me. This, as I mentioned, would have him work on his reading fluency and his word recognition skills as well. Afterwards, after having him read it, I would ask him several questions that would revolve around, as I noticed, the questions that I had noticed he had struggled with within the administration of the IRI, which would be the plot of the story, making inferences, and the setting of the story. So I would ask questions such as, who is the story about? What are they doing in the story? What happens in the beginning of the story? What happens at the end of the story? And these questions would allow me to assess his knowledge based on the plot, as I said, and the setting of the story. I have not actually included any inferential questions. But ultimately, the goal of this intervention would be that John would be a little bit more successful, definitely more successful in his milestone achievements for his reading.